Hi guys, Ivan Zasimov here. It's been a while, obviously. Um, so I wanted to talk about, obviously there's so many things you could be talking about. It's been kind of a wild year between all these coronavirus and the lockdowns, and now the police, some of this police brutality issues with George Floyd, and that erupted into riots. And basically, I've never seen something like this, at least in my lifetime. I've never seen the country go through something like this. Um, and I was sort of thinking, this video and this little rant I'm going to go on is a little bit inspired by the distributist, because it's something he likes to talk about a lot with a kind of rhetorical trick that the left uses. And this is called the Mott and Bailey fallacy. So, for those of you who don't know what this is basically you have a um, a certain view of something, a certain argument that is very subversive and is very controversial, and like you'd have a hard time successfully arguing for it. And that's the argument you use openly and honestly among your friends or people of like mind. But when you're kind of going out and advancing the argument to a broader public, you use a very uncontroversial definition. So a perfect example of this is, okay, the word feminism. Um, you know, so the left today embraces a view of feminism, um, you know, abortion all the way up to the moment of birth. Um, really, just misandrist principles, a really kind of view of just men are all vile, the silly believe all women mantra that anytime a man is accused of rape, it should be counted as if he actually did the rape. Something that I think for general American audiences would be really tough to swallow. But what they do is, they just kind of come out and say, "Oh, feminism is just about equal rights for women. Isn't that what you want? Equal rights for women?" And it becomes really hard to argue with this because if it's a generally at this point uncontroversial thing to say that women and men should have the same political rights. And I was thinking about this. This is what the left it does this with everything, and I was really thinking about it because on a gut level I always knew they did this, but I never had a term for it. And the Mott and Bailey fallacy, this is such a perfect summation of what I think is just everything wrong with the way the left argues today. And particularly, you're seeing this right now. Um, when I go into some of this on my very first video criticizing Antifa, where what the left will do in public and to a general audience, you saw Don Lemon do this in that clip I used in the opening of my video. Well, Antifa merely means anti-fascist. That's all it means. Is they're just against fascism. And why? You're not against fascism? What's wrong with you? What, you like fascism? They'll do this. They'll play this game. But then when you spend more than 10 minutes actually observing Antifa, understanding what it does, understanding some of its antecedents throughout history, especially recent history, it's plain as all daylight that Antifa is not simply about fighting fascism. Where are all the pro Churchill and pro de Gaulle signs if all they care about is people who don't like fascism, right? Um, you know, they're basically, and I bring this up in my video, they're basically a watered down version of the Red Army faction or the Red Brigades. But again, no American in their right mind is going to be okay with a group like this running around on our streets. So what they do is they just, put forward the well, we just don't like fascism, that's all. And you see this happening right now with some of the Antifa agitators that are going around burning down churches, looting businesses, in some cases physically assaulting people. Again, it's hard to distinguish what is Antifa, what are, radical BLM people, what are just, people taking advantage of what's going on, just people who have a criminal mindset anyway. It's very difficult to figure this out. But we all know, or the people I'm talking to know, that Antifa is not simply an anti-fascist organization. And I think you can similarly say this with Black Lives Matter. They play this kind of Mott and Bailey trick too. Again, anyone who studies the Black Lives Matter movement for more than 10 minutes knows it's a pretty radical organization. If you go on their website, they call for things like abolishing the nuclear family, abolishing capitalism, abolishing the police force, these, slavery reparations, things that, again, most Americans in their right mind would be like, yeah, this is ridiculous. None of us are going to support this. But then they simply cover it all up with Black Lives Matter. And what, you don't think Black Lives Matter? Is that why you're opposed to us? Okay, no. No reasonable person thinks Black lives don't matter. But what it is it's almost a kind of Trojan horse. It's a sort of, well, it looks like we're a perfectly reasonable civil rights organization. We're just continuing the work of the good Martin Luther King. But, if you spend more than 10 minutes seriously looking at their organization, you understand it's not that at all. So, I was thinking about this. I'm like, the left really does this with just everything. And again, the Distributus has talked about this in his own video. He talked about this with a debate between Vaush and Count Dankula. And, I was thinking, I'm like, this is a problem conservatives need to figure out how to deal with. Because on the one hand, you see this problem, you see very conciliatory conservatives. So let me just start out and say, obviously, the death of George Floyd was a travesty. I have absolutely no clue. I mean, there is some video we haven't seen yet, but I highly doubt anything's going to justify what those cops did. Just kneeling on the neck of someone for 9 minutes. Basically using an MMA chokehold. I don't even know if you can do that in an MMA to an unarmed civilian like that. Absolutely ridiculous. But there's this thing that the left does where they'll say, well, we're just protesting that. We're just protesting general police brutality. And that's all we're doing. And how can you possibly be opposed to that? And again, we all know that that's not really what they're arguing about. Otherwise, we wouldn't see all these calls to defund the police and Minneapolis seriously considering to defund and disband its police department. But then you run into this problem. You have more conciliatory Republicans, more moderate Republicans, like people like Mitt Romney, who I think kind of fall for this. And they kind of go along with this sort of like good-natured, well, I'm against racism too, and I'm against police brutality too. So they'll kind of march with the protesters. And I think other conservatives will kind of cringe a little bit. Not because we don't think that police brutality is bad, not because we don't think that these police shouldn't get punished for what they did, but, there's something about this that looks a little bit naive on the part of Mitt Romney. It's like, do you really think that's what this is all about, really? Do you really think it's just, and then it's either that or, it's a kind of form of false hope or even cowardice where you sort of think like, well, if I just go along with the I'm against police brutality stuff, I'll look reasonable. And then what'll happen is, then when they start pushing their stuff for reparations or they'll start pushing their stuff for abolishing police, I can argue against that from a position of strength because I was for their moderate stuff. And again, that's just not how this works. If you see how these groups operate, they just sort of, what they do is as soon as, they'll kind of hold Mitt Romney up as a kind of, oh, look, even Mitt Romney is on our side. Look how extreme you are that you can't even agree with Mitt Romney here. And then as soon as Mitt Romney disagrees with slavery reparations, or as soon as Mitt Romney disagrees with abolishing police departments, he'll just be cast out into the outer darkness where he can weep and gnash his teeth. That is essentially what will happen. So on the one hand, you have conservatives who do this. Then on the other hand, you have conservatives who I think kind of overreact and go the other way, where, now it's, again, everyone, left, right, and center, thought that what the Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd was unjust and wrong, and that Derek Chauvin should lose his job for it and should be punished to the full extent of the law for it. And it was only after the riots, and again, this was still a fringe on the right. This was not a very large group of people on the right, but I saw it nonetheless, mostly online. And I only saw this after the riots broke out and after people started defending rioting. well, was George Floyd, well, did he really, did he really, is this really as bad as we're making it out to be? Maybe it's not that bad. Or, this whole thing was fake. I saw one person saying that, oh, Derek Chauvin was not even really a cop. It was all staged. The whole thing was staged. And what this is, in my opinion, it's not because these people are racists. It's not because these people are, just so pro police they will not they will just defend anything a police officer does. It's a kind of gut suspicion now of anything the left supports or anything the mainstream supports, even if what they're supporting is justified in a very narrow sense, like the killing of George Floyd. Because, and I feel this too a lot of times, it's this sort of, well, we've been duped before, right? Oh, remember Covington? Well, that was a video. We supposedly had a video of that. We supposedly had a video of white high school kids harassing an elderly Native American veteran. And then it turns out that more video comes out and the whole thing is a complete, it's just the complete opposite of what people said it was. Mike Brown. This is a perfect case of this. Everyone said, oh, hands up, don't shoot. Oh, he was shot in the back. People who were there lied about what happened. And then more video came out, and now we know that Mike Brown was harassing a convenience store owner. Now we know that Mike Brown was in an altercation with the police officer. We know that he wasn't shot in the back. He was shot in the torso because he was struggling with the officer to get the officer's gun. Okay. Again, completely made up, fabricated story. And I think conservatives get suspicious of this. They're like, how many times am I going to get duped? I don't want to keep getting duped. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to instinctually not believe anything that comes out from the left. Anything that the left supports, I'm just going to say, you know what? It's fake. It's completely fake. It's clear that these lockdowns are going on way too long. It's clear that, obviously we look now at the protests that politicians are being completely hypocritical about what you can and can't do. It's clear that, politicians are just not listening to the evidence. There doesn't seem to be any reason why we have to be this worried about keeping schools closed based on the new evidence we've seen about how coronavirus spreads. But they just don't seem to care. It seems like the more information comes out about coronavirus, the less dangerous it seemed, but it seems like they want to double down even more on these lockdowns. So you know what? The whole idea of coronavirus is just the whole thing is just made up. The whole thing is just completely made up. The testing is all purposely rigged. Fauci is just a tool of, Trump is just a tool of Fauci, and Fauci is some nefarious actor. Because again, it's this idea, and the suspicion is not unjustified in the least, that the left sort of fabricates stories or takes things that are real, like coronavirus is a dangerous disease for certain types of people, the elderly, people with diabetes, or people like that. And they blow it up to this point where now it just seems like they're using this for an agenda. All of a sudden, protesting is okay, but going to church, that's wrong. It seems like it's easier to yell at people who want to operate their business than it is for people who are burning down said business, right? And conservatives pick up on this hypocrisy, and conservatives pick up on the fact that they're being played here. They pick up on the fact that, Black Lives Matter isn't just about Black Lives Mattering. Antifa is not just about being anti-fascist. So what they do in a reaction to all this Motte and Bailey stuff is then they overreact. Then everything that comes out is just a tool of the fake news. Everything that comes out is just a fake way to get conservatives to own in on the libs. And if conservatives acknowledge, for instance, that what happened to George Floyd was wrong, or if conservatives acknowledge that, I think that we can open up more, but coronavirus is a problem, well, then they're just cucks. And I think what conservatives need to figure out a way to do, and it's going to be difficult, but I think it's the only way to really deal with the left, because this is, I think, their chief tactic is this sort of Mott and Bailey idea of we're going to have these really radical ideas among ourselves, but we'll present them to the general public as completely harmless, and you'd have to be crazy to disagree with us. I don't know how we can do it, but conservatives need to find some middle ground between being overly conciliatory and just kind of going along with it, and just sort of, what's the harm in marching with these people? What's the harm with posting a black square? What's the harm with all this? And then on the other hand, which is all this stuff is all fake, it's all fake news, it's all wrong. There needs to be a middle ground. And I don't know what that middle ground is necessarily. But I think it's the biggest rhetorical problem we have right now is dealing with this tactic. I'm not sure what the right thing to do is with this. But it's definitely something we need to think about, or else we're really going to keep getting screwed over by the media and the left.